Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sculpture or 3D Media lecture that we're going to go over today. We're going to start off with this incredibly famous piece by Marcel Duchamp. It is called The Fountain, or the Urinal, as we would refer to it today. This was really controversial, as you can imagine at the time. And this is our first example of a ready-made object or a found object that the artist now imbues with some artistic idea and puts into a gallery. Marcel Duchamp's thought with this was at the time in New York City, he and his other friends, who were the Dada artist group, like kind of crazy outside of the box thinkers, they were very much over the typical art scene and they wanted to get away from traditional painting and like really pretty sculpture, and they thought that all of those things had like already been done and they were looking for more interesting ideas, so really conceptual art. So Marcel Duchamp almost put this into this show as a joke. You just had to pay an entry fee and you could put your work in. So he brought this piece and signed it R. Mutt, as you can see at the bottom there. And that is in jest. It's a joke. It's not his real name, obviously. Um, and he put it in, and I don't know that he really understood exactly where this whole thing was going to take him in the future. He was more interested, he and his friends were interested in seeing how everybody else was going to react when they saw this in the gallery. And as you can imagine, they were offended and they were not happy about it. But it was the impetus for this whole movement of what is art? What is it? And this is via sculpture. So is something art just because I say it's art and put it in a gallery? Was his intention that this urinal is actually art, or was it more about the experience it created in the gallery? Was that the art piece? Really interesting to think about. So conceptual art and surrealism definitely in play here, but ready-made object is what we're really thinking about when it comes to Marcel Duchamp and this part of the early 1900s. This is just a little write-up that happened afterwards. Um, you can read through that if you want. This is another piece by Marcel Duchamp. Again, another ready-made sculpture, just a shovel. But if you hang it in a gallery, it loses its meaning in a lot of ways because it's no longer a functional object. So if this were hanging from the ceiling in a gallery, you can't go use it and shovel snow. It's never going to rust. It's not going to get used. And then you start to appreciate it as an actual object. Like maybe you're thinking about, how is it made? How do I interact with that object? How would I not interact with that object right now? This is another ready-made sculpture. This is like a pots and pans holder. I've also seen people hang their like coffee mugs on it. But again, taking things out of context and putting them in a gallery space where we are forced to think about them in a very different way. So when I look at this now, I think about the shape of it. It would probably cast some really interesting shadows if you were to light it really well. Definitely changes the way that we're going to look at it. Here, taking the ready-made object or found object a little bit further. So when we combine this bicycle wheel and the stool together, neither of them are functional objects anymore. That bicycle wheel is not going to go anywhere, and that stool can't be sat on again. But how are they juxtaposing or working with and against each other visually? It's interesting to think about. Man Ray and Duchamp were peers. This would have been a functioning metronome, so you can imagine that eye kind of ticking back and forth here. Also, a piece by Man Ray. So Man Ray is taking this found object, ready-made object, and he's pushing it a little bit further. Here, this is an old-fashioned iron, right? You would have just heated this up over some coals, but you can't iron with this. It has all those spikes on the bottom. So he takes the function out of this in a different way than just turning it on its side or hanging it from the air. Now this object, even removed from the gallery, is no longer functional. Again, here we have the top of a string instrument, and then instead of the strings, we have horsehair coming down, which is what the bowstrings are made out of. So he's taking the same objects that you would use to actually make beautiful music and changing them in a way that the elements are there, but the product can no longer be achieved. Very different work here. This is an artist named Tracey Emin. She focuses a lot on storytelling and recreating lived in spaces, She creates a psychological space. So how do you feel when you're around the piece, and then the emotion that's imbued with it. This, from what I have read, is her recreation of her bedroom after she had a bit of a psychotic break, a mental breakdown. Um, and so this is really like a a record of what that experience was like for her, and then showing it to the audience and almost forcing the viewer to insert themselves into her psychological space. I think we can all see that this is maybe not the most comfortable space to be living in, and for us as viewers, it's uncomfortable to look at because this would be someone's private space. It's a little bit messy. The bed's not made, right? And so we would be a stranger in this situation. And so it's really getting at where do you belong in a story? So storytelling is a big thing for her. This is another piece. Obviously, we have a tent here. This would have been about a specific relationship that she had. We have the date there on the side. You could potentially get in this in the gallery. I'm not sure if you were allowed to or not, but something that we're very familiar with, right? Same thing with the bed. We're very familiar with that. We're very familiar with a tent. She has these sewn on patches, so it's really kind of an accessible way that she's creating things, but the idea is much bigger. Same artist, very different kind of artwork. This piece is supposedly about her upbringing and her childhood. And I think you can tell without me having to explain it that this is about instability and fragility in a lot of ways. And then also um, this kind of danger in the pursuit of home. How do I get there? Is it safe to go there? It's a bit precarious. You don't really even want to get too close to it in fears that it might collapse. But there's a lot more to it than just that one visual. And you can imagine maybe being in this space and walking around this installation that she would specifically have built for this gallery space. Moving into our next kind of section of earthworks. Earthworks and land art are pieces that an artist will create in a landscape to alter it in some way that is either complementing the natural elements or completely disrupting them. A lot of these earthworks are what we call in situ or on site, meaning they're in one place, right? They're not going to be recreated somewhere else. They can't be recreated somewhere else. You can't just like pick them up and move them. So this is a piece by Michael Heiser. I do have some in-process shots here. Obviously, this is from a bird's eye view. He kind of cut away this giant like scar into the land. So here you can see the kind of beginnings. You can see how deep that trench is for it to have been visible from above like that. And the planning that went into this too. I mean, when you're building a trench this big and this deep, you're not just going to like draw a little zigzag with your feet like we would in the sand or the snow. This had to take some major planning and a lot of people to execute it. It also makes you ask why. I mean, this is a pretty barren landscape, but like why and how did he get the permission? Or those are the questions that I ask. Uh, Here he is creating these giant kind of voids in the ground. I don't think that you'd be able to get up close to them, but again, a kind of experiential thing. Here's a piece of his that's in accessible public areas. So we have this really big boulder over this like sunken walkway, and you are allowed to walk under it. And that creates a bit of a, well, first of all, it's interactive because you have to participate or choose not to participate. Also, it's in the public sphere, so it doesn't cost anything and it's always there. And it creates this psychological experience. You might hesitate and be like, I'm not walking under that. That might fall. I've seen Final Destination. I'm not doing that. Or you might be like, you get a little bit of an adrenaline rush and you're like, this is cool. I'm going to walk under it. I trust that my city wouldn't put in an installation that is potentially dangerous. Um, and then it's also beautiful and it makes people think about their interaction with the space they're in and probably with the other people that are in the same area, kind of like the Bean in Chicago, aka Cloudgate. Here's another installation, earthwork by Robert Smithson. This is called Spiral Jetty, and this piece obviously goes out into the water. And a big focus on his work for a couple pieces is impermanence. So eventually these are going to be eroded and washed away just by the natural forces of the tides coming in and out and weather and that kind of thing. So here's a much more weathered view of this in situ piece, and you can see the little teeny tiny people there. Here's another piece by him. So excavating the land that would have been in the water and moving it onto the earth behind it to create a little earth mound, which no doubt is inspired by Native American artworks here up in North America, and then pyramids in Middle and Central America, and a lot of earthworks that are part of the ancient world over in Europe and the Near East. So this would have been massive. And then he just lets the nature kind of take over it and take it back. So this is not as disruptive. I mean, it's just disruptive, but it's not as disruptive as that big kind of gash in the earth. So this is an artist, Nancy Holt, that she's not manipulating the land in any way, but she's manipulating the way that you are forced to interact with the land and guiding you to see things that she would like to see. If you were able to watch the James Turrell video where he bought that crater in New Mexico, this is kind of that idea, but to me makes more sense, and you can actually go there. So guiding you to where the sun sets and creating this different experience than if you were just out in that open desert. And you can also see those holes drilled into the side of this big concrete pipe. So that lets the light through and gives you a different kind of experience with this as well. And with this, maybe not intentional, but if you've ever been in a big tube like that, you know, it's kind of echoey. I can imagine that it'd be cooler in there than on the outside if it was a hot day. So a really kind of immersive experience here as well. Here's another piece of hers. Um, a little bit more domestic, if you will, or in a park, something like that, not quite out in the vastness. This is a piece, an older piece by Alexander Calder. Alexander Calder kind of pioneered the kinetic sculpture, which is also known as moving sculpture, but usually, not always, but usually a kinetic sculpture is done without any motors. It's just kind of like with the wind, or it has its own propulsion of some sort. And Calder also played with scale and size and this kind of whimsical, fun feeling. So here is a little circus, and a lot of these pieces probably moved around. There's probably a video. Oh yeah, there's a video linked in here if you would like to click on it and go through. Here's another piece of his, a little strongman. He uses a lot of found objects as well. So we have probably some little wire, maybe some paper clips, and then a mouse trap there at the bottom. So this, again, would have been one of those little like moving ponies as you pull it along. Kind of a simple idea, but really pioneering the way that art could become more interactive. This is one of the types of sculptures that Calder is known for. This is a kinetic mobile, so something that would hang from the ceiling. You've probably seen mobiles hang over babies' cribs. They kind of just slowly move with the air. I've seen a lot of these in airports, and they're beautiful. They're just like, they're like fish. It's like they're in water. They're really cool. In contrast to that, he makes these giant sculptures that are in public places. There's one up in Grand Rapids, and most of the time, these giant sculptures are related to natural forms. I grew up in Connecticut, and there's one in Hartford, Connecticut, and it's called Stegosaurus, and it looks kind of like a dinosaur. But these are cool because they're in a public space. Everybody can get to interact with them. They really break up the monotony of big city buildings. This is an artist named Sarah Z. I don't know a lot about her work, but what I can see just by looking at it is there's a lot of repetition, there's a lot of found objects. This would have been an example of installation art because she would create it specifically in that space. She could probably create it somewhere else, but it wouldn't be exactly the same due to the limitations of the ceiling or the wall structure or the, area of the space. A couple examples of that. Again, here, repetition, size, scale. This is going back. Remember those slides that we saw? This is kind of like that, but also not, because I would not be participating in this. And also the ones that are in the upper levels are not functional. I don't know that any of these are functional. Um, these make me nervous. I'm not even afraid of heights, and these make me a little nervous. And here's another piece from her. Uh, Yayoi Kasuma, if you didn't watch the video on our Moodle page about her, it does have subtitles, but she's really cool and a pretty badass old lady at this point. So she creates these super, super immersive art pieces. You can tell by this image, she would have the entire room covered in this kind of texture. And I know a handful of people that would be incredibly uncomfortable being around this pattern in depth like this, but that's part of her intention is that her work comes from a lot of anxiety and processing trauma. And so some people might be overwhelmed by this, but she created it because her brain was overwhelmed. Um, so immersive art, scale, installation, repetition, right? All those polka dots. She's creating worlds, like an entire environment, and experiential art. So you're going to experience it. And then psychedelic. We're going to see a little bit more of the like psychedelic thing in a second. So here, this is a little bit more like whimsical, a little bit more like dreamy. You can see the kind of psychedelic thing here. This is totally crazy. This would have been a room covered in this yellow wall with black polka dots, and then a mirrored building in the middle. And so this is like your brain is gonna not know what to do with this. This is one of her more psychedelic experiential things, where she wants to completely eliminate the room around you, and put you into this kind of transcendental place. So this would have been somewhere where you can sit and you're just surrounded by infinite nothingness, which is really hard to create in real time, like in three-dimensional space and 4D time. Artists can create like a vastness on a two-dimensional painting, but we know that it has an end because it's on a wall. And so what she's able to do is create this like never-ending experience that's within a built space, which is really interesting. Here again, you would go into this little prefab building and everything is just covered in these dots. And it's almost like a sickness. In the video, it does explain that. I mean, she's like 98 years old now, but she is living in a mental health memory care, I guess, maybe just whatever kind of institution. And so you can imagine that these dots would just kind of like manifest and you'd be obsessed with putting them everywhere. Sometimes these are interactive installations where you can take stickers or whatever and put them wherever you want. And so like the one where people are measuring their height, it's built over time with the community. This is an example of kind of a performance art, but there's not performers that are actually living and breathing. So there's inanimate objects that are part of this performance. And so we have two just like standing fans here, and then a ribbon that would have come out of like a cassette tape in the middle, and they're keeping it afloat. And so it's kind of its own thing, but it doesn't have its own intention or memory, which is really interesting. Same thing here. They would have been blowing this one kind of strand all the way around the room, and it would have danced in its own way. And you can imagine the whirring of the fans that are going on. Um, really interesting installation art. She also did a lot of space modification. So these are kind of pillars or tubes that are interrupting the space, but you can still see through them. So in a psychic way, they're there, but they're not there. A very different kind of perspective is she made a big like string line tube that you would have to walk through. So interrupting your perception of the space that you're in and also the way that you can interact with it, because you can't leave this, but you can see it, but it's not the same way you would see it if this project wasn't there. So there's a tube where you would walk through. These are pretty cool. So these are sculptures of found objects and pieces of metal and trash and wood. And this pair that are a couple, a partnership, work together to create these sculptures that when light is cast upon them and their shadows hit the wall, they're completely formed sculptures and they look like these shadows are actual people that could be posing. But when you get to see what the material is, you understand that it's not a real human. I think these are really cool. And they take a lot of time and a lot of precision to make. I mean, it just looks like a pile of trash when all the lights are on, but then when you turn the lights off and very specifically put a light source and a cast shadow, it's, you know exactly what's going on here. We have a couple, one of them is smoking a cigarette, the other one has a glass in their hand. They're sitting back to back. Completely different, but same artist couple. They do work in a lot of neon light and large installation work, as well as these kind of more mod, cartoony kind of sculptures. Oh, back to the shadow work. And this is the last slide for this presentation. But again, here they have some discarded items that they've put together and punched holes in. And so now they have this cityscape that they're emulating. All right, so that's just a small sample of three-dimensional artwork. Obviously, there's tons and tons of it, probably all around you. Um, that's it for this one, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.